There's this really fascinating analysis out there predicting a major AI bubble collapse. But here's the twist. It's not using your typical market signals. Nope, it's drawing its inspiration from a world you would probably never, ever expect. The world of classical music.
So let's just start with that question right there. I mean, think about it. What if the market's boom and bust cycles weren't just random chaos? What if they actually had a rhythm, a structure, a kind of musicality to them? That's the core idea, the central metaphor we're going to explore today.
So the big idea here is that economic bubbles follow the exact same patterns you'd find in a piece of music. The slow, exciting buildup, that's your crescendo. That moment of absolute peak euphoria, when everyone's all in, that's the massive climactic chord. And the crash? Well, that's just the resolution of all the dissonance, bringing the entire system back into a stable harmony.
Okay, so how in the world do you actually translate stock market behavior into music? Well, the analysis uses this specific tool called the Echo Code framework. It breaks down the market's health into a bunch of different variables, but honestly, there are two that we absolutely need to get our heads around.
First up is something called practical resonance, or PR for short. Now, this is the simplest but maybe the most important measure of all. Is the technology creating real, actual, tangible value? Is it solving real problems? Is it making real money? In musical terms, it doesn't matter how beautifully the orchestra is playing if the audience is just getting up and walking out of the concert hall. The second one is branch resonance, or BR. This measures how complex and interconnected the market is. So imagine a huge symphony with dozens and dozens of instruments all playing a super tight, really complex chord. I mean, it can be absolutely beautiful, right? But, and this is a big but, it also means that if just one key instrument hits a sour note, the entire harmony can just collapse into noise.
And this is where it gets pretty alarming. These are the current scores for the AI market. Now, while the technical scores for things like consensus and overall resonance are extremely high, just look at the two scores we just talked about. Branch resonance is way up there. Everyone is financially tied together. But practical resonance, the real-world value, it's dangerously low, sitting at just 0.15. The music is blaring, but the hall is practically empty.
And here's the thing, this isn't some brand new song the market is playing. The Echo Code framework shows that this exact same pattern has played out before, in bubbles that, let's be honest, we're all very, very familiar with.
And this right here, this direct comparison, this should really make you stop and think. At its absolute craziest peak, the dot-com bubble had a practical resonance score of 0.2. Today's AI bubble is even lower, at 0.15. What this framework suggests is that the entire AI edifice is built on a foundation that's even weaker than the one that crumbled back in 2000.
So, with a structure this fragile, what specific event could actually cause the music to stop? Well, the analysis points to two primary triggers that could set off the whole chain reaction.
The first trigger has this fancy name, circular financing dissonance. But remember that super high branch resonance we talked about? This is where it becomes deadly. The analysis predicts a major player, say OpenAI, misses its revenue targets. Its valuation just plummets. All of a sudden, NVIDIA's massive investment turns into a huge liability on their books, forcing them to sell, and, well, that's the first domino. It just triggers a cascade across the entire tightly wound sector.
Now, the second trigger is much simpler, and it's backed up by a pretty stark reality check from an MIT report. A staggering 95% of the money that has been poured into generative AI has produced no substantial return. That low practical resonance score isn't just a theory, folks. It's a direct reflection of a massive, massive misallocation of capital.
So you put all these factors together, and the framework makes a startlingly specific prediction, a 65 to 75% probability that this entire structure collapses in the second quarter of 2026.
The analysis even lays out a specific timeline for how this could play out. It begins quietly, late 2025 with some disappointing earnings. Then, in early 2026, that's when the dissonance emerges. The public narrative starts to crack. And finally, in Q2, the full collapse, as that cascade of selling begins and panic really takes hold.
So, what happens after the crash? Does the music just stop forever? Not exactly. It resolves into a new, much quieter movement. So, let's look at the predicted aftermath, both for the tech sector and for the wider economy.
The impact on big tech is predicted to be directly tied to just how exposed they are to the AI hype. So you've got NVIDIA right at the center of it all, potentially falling by as much as 55%. Then, at the other end of the spectrum, you have a company like Apple, with its strong real-world value, seeing a much smaller decline.
But of course, these shockwaves wouldn't be contained to just Silicon Valley. The analysis predicts a major correction for the broader markets. We're talking hundreds of thousands of job losses and a significant hit to US GDP, creating a pretty major economic crisis for whichever administration is in power at the time.
And this really brings us to a crucial point. This crash isn't seen as some random tragedy, but more like a mathematical necessity. The framework operates on what it calls a zero-sum law. The roughly $3 trillion in phantom value created by pure hype must be balanced out. The market, almost like a law of physics, has to return to equilibrium.
And that brings us to the final, core idea of this entire analysis. The AI bubble may burst, sure, but the technology itself will absolutely continue. The symphony isn't over. It's just moving from a deafening, unsustainable climax to a quieter, more thoughtful movement. Because in markets, just like in music, the resonance always finds its balance.